Now, we've just had elections here in the UK, 2024, and I think in America they're also going to have elections. Pretty weird timing that the UK elections and the American elections are in the same year. Never normally happens. What do elections mean? From an ANCAP, libertarian, freedom perspective, voluntarist, etc. Nothing, pretty much. Pretty much nothing, apart from there's a ton of people who just want to swap our slave master and can't see that all those people who stand on the top, regardless of what party or political ideology they supposedly come from, are the same and will do the same things to you. But the normies will watch their TV and they will believe and they will vote, and if they're persuaded blue-pilled to the left, they will still vote. And there will be a big circus and they will pretend to be excited around election time. I don't think they'll pretend to be excited. I think they are getting excited by it. But it's pointless. There's no point in them doing so. It doesn't make sense. By all means get excited by what you want to, but swapping your slave master for another slave master who's basically the same guy? What are you doing? What do you think you're doing exactly? They think they're changing things. They think they're changing someone bad for someone good, or being able to pick something that will do something different around the next time. To which the anarchists we're just laughing and laughing in a sort of clown world semi-depressed way. I mean, it would be fucking funny, and it kind of is if it wasn't so fucking sad at the same time. There's the dichotomy. There's a ram very confused at my presence. And all the normies, that is to say, like the proles from 1984, the people who you would call normal people, I guess, the people who are non-political, so they don't know they're being controlled, the people who watch TV and think it's harmless and don't understand that it's a government propaganda tool, no matter which channel you turn to, no matter whether you're watching fiction or non-fiction, news or TV shows. It's designed as a system of control to make you think certain things belonging to certain ideologies, but mainly to make you worship the state, worship the government no matter what, back the blue, believe in police, believe in authority, follow rules, believe in safety, and all these things, and to create a kind of collectivist herd mentality that dobs people in and reports people for things that are normal, things that are completely harmless activities, especially people who believe in freedom, like me. And like everyone else who's in the kind of libertarian area of non-normie political people. So if you're a normie, you're not political, essentially. You may watch the news, you may think you're following politics by voting, by seeing what's on the news, but unless you're calling yourself some brand of ideology that you've researched yourself, say you're a conservative, or you're a leftist socialist, or you're a libertarian, or you're an objectivist, or you're a monarchist, or whatever. There are lots of different political ideologies out there. If you're not calling yourself one of those because you've researched it, you know, whether it's a really nuanced branch of one of those things, then you'd be a normie, essentially. You know, you haven't tried to dig deep to try and find out what's going on with you, especially with laws and things that the government installs every month to do things. So a non-normie would be one of those political factions, I suppose, or ideologies, depending on whether you're talking about a collectivist movement or a individualist belief set, like that's what libertarianism is, or should be, although there are a lot of fake libertarians out there, linos. So that's the normies and versus the poles, people you see out on the street. You can get tons more poles on Twitter, you get tons more normies on mindless social media like Facebook and TikTok, although you also get a shit ton of leftists on TikTok who are more pole than normie, although the left has an enormous sway over the normies, which is horrific considering what they've done in the 20th century and 21st century. Mass murder and all that, famines, gulags, control. Either way, you know, whether you vote, let's say there's a left and a right. Let's say, guys, for the sake of argument, and I believe this for a long time, that there's a left and the right and they do different things from each other, rather than there's a left and the right and both of them tend left. Or you could say they're authoritarian statists. They both do the same things and they think they're doing different things, and that's similar to like the sects of leftism or conservatism. You could say there are sects developing there where you pick an ideology that believes a certain thing and then they split into loads of different groups and they think that all the different groups mean anything, like they're all separate from each other and they believe different things. But if you put on a certain lens, like the lens of anarchists, for instance, a real anarchist by the way, like an ANCAP or voluntarist, you put on a freedom advocate lens, you realise that the left and the right do virtually all the same things as each other, and the different shades of leftist or lefty or whatever do all the same things as each other, and all the different shades of conservative do all the same things as each other, or different shades of rightist, I suppose. So what are you picking? You're not really picking anything. So if you're supposedly picking, I mean, our conservatives in the UK, they might have been what you would label as right in the past, but they've become leftists since lockdown, like overtly socialist. I mean, you say overtly, they don't tell people they're socialist like Keir Starmer would, who, by the way, he's the one who won the election recently, so we're all pretty fucked. Like Keir Starmer and Labour Party people like Corbyn would call themselves socialists. I suppose that's being more overt. They'd act socialist too, obviously, whereas the Conservative Party, since lockdown, would not tell you they're socialists, but they would just act socialist, do all the socialist things. And the sun's coming out. So forgive me if I change look suddenly. Bam! What the fuck happened? Trust me, we are in the same video. Continuity fail. I wasn't going to film myself putting my hat on. Where were we? So what do the right and the left, supposedly, if you're going to use those labels, what do they both do? In terms of government, they're both going to tax you. Lowering taxes doesn't mean anything. You're being taxed, and there are so many different kinds of tax. You just need to go on Twitter, go into Rothmas. Eventually you will land on the repeated meme, or several different kinds of repeated meme that all hint at the same thing, that there are so many different types of tax. It is astounding, and I think maybe none of the normies really notice just how many forms of tax there are, which means they're being stolen from en masse every month, an enormous amount of money per person, and it's all going to government, and that's not being spent on public services. There may be a tiny amount of money pushed into there just to make it look like it's going to good use, to like repairing potholes or to hospitals like the NHS or council stuff, but actually 95% of that money is just going to government. It's just going to increasing the wealth of the members of government, and then they choose what to do with the money. It's a lie that it's being spent on services and coming back to aid the public. The budget and all that is a complete lie. It's a misdirection. They're saying they're doing something with your money that they're not doing with your money. Either way, it's your money and it's taken from you without your consent. It'd be fine if tax was a subscription service, because then you could say, I consent to giving all my money away. I think I've probably been through this in some recent video. I can't remember which one, but I think I went through this at some point. Tax would work better as a subscription service. I mean, tax would work better without government at all. And then the subscription service would be the left giving their money to some kind of corporation that deals in helping health hospitals, private hospitals, repairing potholes and things, but they don't actually give a fuck about that, so I don't even know why we're going into that. So your money is being stolen from you in tons of different ways, and it's all a tax. There's income tax, there's VAT on all your shopping, inheritance tax, property tax, road tax. This is just a tiny amount of all the tax there is. Welfare, and it happens in America in the same way as it happens here, and we don't need our money stolen from us without our consent. That's what it is. It's theft. We didn't choose for it's the majority of us didn't choose from our wages that we worked hard to achieve in our jobs for a percentage of that to be stolen from us, and a very large percentage of that. And if there was no government, I don't think the normies quite understand just how rich they'd be, just by virtue of there being no government. I also don't think they understand what that world would be like if you had no government. Now the left would come up with warlords would take over and stuff, and warlords are currently in control. What do you think the government is? So that's ridiculous when they bring up that argument. And they're like, who would maintain the roads if the roads weren't state-owned, if they're all privately owned? If you see private roads, in general, they are incredibly well maintained. They do exist. There's actually quite large stretches of them in America. I didn't know this, but I think Larkin Rose actually helped to build one. There are some private roads in America that are even like highways, like big stretches of giant roads. Over here in the UK, you've got like private drives and stuff on private land to people's houses and that sort of thing. Those are privately maintained roads, and they're maintained way better than the state-run roads, which are most of the roads you see in the UK, which have thousands of potholes on, like any time it gets cold or rainy. And the councils do not... Councils, by the way, a branch of government, as with any public sector jobs, councils will not rush out to repair potholes. They won't even put together a force that is dedicated to repairing potholes. And potholes are quite a big deal because they cost you tons of money when you fuck up your suspension from going over a ton of them each year. It can just destroy your car's suspension. And obviously they slow everyone down as well for trying to get to where they're going, because they have to go to 20 miles an hour or put them in danger because they have to swerve to the other side of the road to avoid the pothole every time they're beside it. So yeah, potholes is a big one to bring up, and that's why roads get mentioned in connection with libertarianism quite a lot. But those would be massively well maintained if they were privately owned. Another aspect of that is because it becomes capitalistic. Each privately owned road and its maintainers who go out to maintain it would become like businesses, and they'd all be competing with each other for good customer service, which is also something that happens when you don't have a government to regulate and control businesses. They actually get to compete with each other, because they're not all following regulations where you can't do this, you can't do that, and all that. Like, we'll run you out of business. Like, when I was trying to start a business for a short stretch, I haven't succeeded yet, hopefully I will at some point. I was trying to start up a health food business in a certain town before I looked at other town alternatives, and this town already had a health food shop in it, and I wanted to start up a health food shop of my own. And I phoned up the owner of this like shopping arcade thing where there was a health food shop and there was also spaces for businesses, and he was interested at first, and then I mentioned it was a health food store, and he said, I can't allow you to open up a health food store in my town, X town, because we've already got a health food store. This is leftism. It's the opposite of capitalism, because you're not allowing competing businesses to exist in the same space as each other, which destroys competition and destroys markets, destroys getting even close to the free market, because the free market depends on having, you have 5 barbers in the same area and they're competing with each other for the best customer service, and the one that survives isn't there because it's been regulated to be the only business there in town out of some false charity. It's there because it survived a period of competition where it produced the best customer service by doing the things its customers wanted more than the other 4 barbers or hairdressers. It's like the time during lockdowns and stuff where there would be businesses totally obeying government demands and regulations, and a lot of freedom advocates just wouldn't go in those ones. Like, you have to stand on this floor, you have to sit at this table behind this screen, there are big plastic dividers between each table, maybe even between each customer being served their food. You have to wear a mask until the spaghetti comes, and you take off your mask for some reason like that. Like, why were you wearing a mask in the first place if you took it off as soon as you started eating? Not that the mask worked to do anything anyway. Yeah, that would be an example of bad customer service, because you're doing things that would not give any freedom to your customers, and some of them would obviously decide to go and have their food somewhere else, which many did. And that doesn't just happen under lockdowns, that happens now, just like outside lockdowns and before then even. It's just the nature of competing businesses, which is all destroyed when you regulate them, or when a higher authority, or in particular the government, regulate business, which is why we don't have capitalism and we don't have a truly free market, except in black markets and the illegal places and undocumented trade between individuals. Like, I pay you 5 apples, you fix my fence, and we don't tell government it even happens, so they can't tax it at all. That's true capitalism right there. And unfortunately, under government, you can make that deal. Just don't tell the government, and then you're engaging in capitalism. But as soon as the government finds out about it, you've broken the law, and they're going to try and arrest you and things, merely for just trading and not telling them about it, and not giving them an ability to steal from you, to not provide for public services. So anyway, that was a bit of a side rant, but I think it helps to illustrate some of the insanity of government. Also, they get into foreign wars. The draft is non-consensual. We've got a road here in Dartmoor called Conchi Road, which is built by conscientious objectors to World War One. I think they were like draft evaders. I think they call it the conscription here in the UK. So they avoided being conscripted into the army, and as a result of saying they didn't want to fight for the government as a soldier against their will, they were imprisoned and forced to be labour workers to build this, break rocks, and I think it's hard work, and build this road out on Dartmoor. Now there's a little plaque memorial to it, which I think it stands to highlight the work they did after being imprisoned wrongly for doing something that's right, choosing what they wanted to do with their body and their property and their life. Anyway, these are some more bullshit things governments do. There's thousands of them. You can compare what anarchists have done, and freedom advocates and libertarians in world history. Compare that to what governments and anything tied to governments have done, and it's conjectural what anarchy has supposedly done wrong, mainly because we haven't had it yet. Compare that to the things government has done throughout history, which are provably horrific. It's the mass murders, through every country, every government, all the theft, and it's night and day the difference between someone who believes in freedom and someone who wants to control everyone and steal your money, as it would be. So it really doesn't matter whether you're supposedly right or left. So where were we? We were on what does the right do that the left does that is similar or the same? And that's what the government would do. It would tax you. It also would engineer a fake emergency to create a lockdown for the whole world. Each government did it because they're under the control of the UN and the World Economic Forum, which are attempting to become world governments under Klaus Schwab. Look up Agenda 21 and Agenda 30 by the UN. Read Klaus Schwab's The Great Reset and compare that to what happened during lockdowns. Also check out Event 201, I believe it's called, which was before anyone said there was a thing called COVID-19. Check all those things out. Those are the people who are currently puppeteering world governments, and they are socialists who think they have a position of power, but they're actually just a vast gang of rich elites who don't make money via trade like we do. They make money via theft in the form of taxation and all the things like taxation. Away from government, technically, the things that the right and the left do is they push for certain things that are identifiable. They both argue over race. They both wish to segregate based on race. They both wish to segregate based on gender. They are both pro-tax. It may not seem like it, but they're both pro-cop. When you're looking at the cops versus Antifa, what you're actually seeing is the rights cops, or the state's cops, depending on which party is supposedly in power, versus the left's cops. If they were in power, they would have the police force anyway, but they would also have Antifa. It just so happens that when the Conservatives are in power, it seems like there's more of a difference between the cops and the Antifa, but they are still basically on the same side because of what the cops are propping up, which is, how is taxation happening? How are you stolen from so easily? Because you'd have to fight the cops, and because you are conditioned to believe in law being some kind of barometer for morality, and law is not a barometer for morality. Law is a way that the government will control you in order to be immoral and steal from you. And it uses the police to do this. The police are selected from members of the public, but they're just asked to do the job, and they blindly take the job, not really knowing, like most normies, that what they're actually doing is being paid by theft of wages from the public, and also using guns that the public should have, but for some reason is only given to the cops to punish them if they don't like being stolen from. That's the main thing. The other one is bodyguarding the government from the public, like if there's a protest or something, or if there's a riot, or if there's a rebellion or uprising that doesn't like what the government's doing, and they get close to government officials or government headquarters, the government will turn out the police on them to be basically an army of defending bodyguards. So that's the primary purpose of the cops. A, to bodyguard the government from harm. B, to ensure the cycle of stolen tax money goes on and on and on forever. And that's why cops aren't your friend. Friends don't let friends become cops. That's an anarchist meme. Don't back the blue because you're backing your own slavery and being stolen from. That's essentially what that is. And the same goes for the army as well. So the thing about police and army, state officers, is that they don't generate their own wealth via trade. If you send an army out, like, to war, it's constantly consuming resources. It's constantly consuming food and rations and weapons and money. And where's all that money coming from? The supposed home front, all the people in the home country who are working and actually generating it via trade for the government to steal from. So you may say the army are putting in effort fighting a war, but they are just stealing from the public. They're not actually putting effort where effort's meant to go, which is into trading and competing, like selling goods, building things, making things to sell, selling things that are on the market, buying things that are on the market even. This is trade. And this is something that the police and the army don't do to get their money. It's just given to them for free, essentially. For free while they're slaves and they do what they're told, which is the same for all of us, I guess, who receive money supposedly from government. But government doesn't produce any money. Government produces money in the same way that ticks produce blood. Like, they don't produce blood. They are parasites. They jump on you, bite you, and steal it from you. They're vampires. The left and the right both believe in centralized power. The left and the right, I've noticed quite recently, both kind of follow and believe in a form of feminism. I thought it was only the left doing it at first, but once you start looking into it, especially with the trans debate thing rising up recently, you've got this kind of, like, the trans bathroom scandal thing, you start to notice what the conservatives are saying during that, and you realise that they're holding up this feminism thing themselves. Basically sexual segregation. They want men and women to be apart from each other, and that is also fed into by the whole belief that masculinity and femininity are useful terms that the conservatives believe. I don't believe that. I don't go as far as the far left do in the other direction, where we should completely erase and blur the lines of being male and female, like almost biologically, if not behaviourally. I think there are things to be preserved about behaving as a woman, behaving as a man, but I also think there are ways that we can act the same as each other, think the same as each other, while respecting the fact that we are not biologically and physically the same as each other. So it's kind of a nuanced view there. You know, obviously men and women aren't the same physically, and some parts of how they think mentally aren't the same, but it doesn't have to be that way. So a lot of that is actual conditioning to think in a certain way that's different. Like a woman is conditioned to think in a certain way by media and stuff that is very different from a man, and that actually I think is harmful and should be discouraged. Conservative versus a leftist will argue in different directions about race and which races should be where and doing what, but they will still see colour, and that's a problem. They'll still see the race of people and invoke meaning from that. They won't see people individualistically, ignoring immutable characteristics, such as what you're born with and you can't help. Like if you're born black, you're born white, you can't help that. That's what you are. You've got to live your life dealing with that fact, and nobody should segregate you or put you into different treatment categories based on that. Same as if you're born a man, born a woman, born short, born tall, born blue eyes, born brown eyes, things like that. You know, these are immutable characteristics, so we're either born with them or we're born knowing we'll grow into this thing of having this feature, and we can't do anything about it when we're an adult, which is slightly different from being born with it. Like you're born bald, but you might be a blonde or you might be a brunette, and when you grow older there's not much you can do about that. I'm putting aside dyeing hair for obvious reasons but just considering your natural hair colour, like you're not born with that hair obviously, but you are born with the knowledge that you'll definitely grow up to be either blonde or brunette, or black haired or ginger, whatever. That's like an immutable characteristic too. Okay, we got you this far. How about this? The left and the right are both pro-censorship, anti-free speech. That's another one. The left and the right are hypocritical quite a lot, in an SJW sort of a way. If you look at the new rise of like the conservative film commentator, and you see their videos and what they're criticising and what they're doing, they've been criticising, quite rightly, communism, communist traits, socialist traits, what is labelled as woke in films, in the cinemas, and how we've entered a period of bad filmmaking that is because of socialism being prevalent in Hollywood. You can look at any film made after the 2010s, I think, or maybe earlier than that even, was happening to some small degree in the 90s. And the conservative film commentators will criticise these things in the films, which is great, but they're absolute hypocrites, because you've got conservative commentators beginning to make their own films and their own comics, and when they make their own films and comics, and other people from the right or from the centre criticise their work in the same way as being either too conservative or even having their own kind of woke or leftist traits in their movies, they don't like it. And quite a big reaction I've seen with these conservative filmmakers and comic makers is that they suddenly, for some reason, can't deal with criticism. They can't take it. You've got good ones who can take it, like Ethan Van Sciver, who did Cyberfrog. But you've got ones who definitely can't take it, like Eric July and Yellow Flash, and even to some degree Razorfist as well. They're all trying to make their own conservative version of media culture in comics and films, but they're acting like fucking leftist SJWs, the same ones that they've been criticising this whole time whenever they review a film or review a comic. They can't see in the mirror, I think, these conservative guys. And it's just become really clear recently in that way that the right is the left. And you always also see the conservatives censoring people, being against free speech, and also being against porn and sexual stuff in the same way that the left is. People don't realise that the left are like neo-Puritans in the same way as the right is. They're very prudish, and they will try and crack down on things like sexual imagery online, porn, as well as feminism will just do it anyway with like flirting, compliments, greetings, communication between men and women. But the conservatives won't realise that they're doing the same thing, and that they have their own kind of similar versions of hate speech, but they're not noticing that they're doing it in the same way as the left does. So a lot of the differences between the right and the right won't even notice that they're doing the same things as the left. They're moving around on autopilot, being hypocritical, and they don't have the self-awareness to compare their own behaviour with the people they're criticising. They started out alright, although they were stealing kind of ideology from anti-SJWs like Sargon of Akkad. And now they're off on autopilot, and they're just not really aware of what they're doing. They lack the self-analysis and the clarity to just see what's kind of obvious to those of us on the outside looking in, that they're just like mirror images of each other now. And hate speech is a gatekeeper to free speech because it's indefinable. Porn is also a gatekeeper to free speech because it's indefinable. Basically, if you create a law to ban hate speech, that's the same thing as creating a law to ban porn. You don't have something to define as hate, and you don't have something to define as porn. Therefore, you've created a law that allows you to ban anything you want. Like broad strokes, huge amounts of things you can just ban. And it all boils down to anti-government speech at the end of the day. Like the goal of saying, you're not allowed to say slurs in public, you'll get arrested. You're not allowed to make jokes in public, you'll get arrested. You're not allowed to make jokes on the internet. You're not allowed to talk about Nazis in a jokey way, you'll get arrested. It's the same thing as, you're not allowed to make this sort of art. You're not allowed to make these sort of lines on a page. You're not allowed to portray a woman or a man in this way. You're only allowed to portray men in this certain way. You're only allowed to portray women in this certain way. Your particular lines on a page are banned. I guess with the porn, it's basically, it strays into art, the banning of art. So the banning of visual stuff as a form of hate speech is catered to by banning porn, and the banning of audio or talk or communicative stuff is covered by banning hate speech. And once these bans are in place, they just whittle down the amounts of things that you can say to the point where it's where the government wants it, which is if you mildly joke or insult the government, as seen in Venezuela or anywhere in the history where there's hate speech laws, because these things have existed throughout history, you can be arrested for, joking at a politician's expense or something. And that's where they want it to be, what it all boils down to at the end of the day. Are the left and the right both religious? Yes. Do the left and the right both want a ruler to rule over them? Yes. Here's another big one. Do the left and the right both want to control the children of other people, not their own? Yes. So that's always a big one with communists and socialists, is that they exist in the teaching profession in quite a big way, in state-run schools and things, because that allows them to raise children away from their parents, teach them to be soldiers for government, fill their heads with all the thoughts and ideology needed to rebel against their own parents. Basically, it's a way of breaking up the family unit, making sure that the children will not be rebellious towards government and will always do what government wants, so the government can continue the cycle of theft and slavery and control. How does the right do this? Well, the right's concerned about abortion, that's one thing. In some kind of humanistic fashion, faux humanism, I guess, they're getting concerned about the children of other people, not their own. But those children don't belong to them. Those children belong to the biological parents, whether they're left or not. It goes into other things as well. The right would like to raise the left's kids in religious schools, unless they believe in homeschooling, which I think is a different kettle of fish and is quite admirable, to be honest. The right will also seek to control kids in the way that they will see how leftist parents, which is a bit of a rare thing, I guess. Is it rare? It's kind of rare. Leftist families and parents, because the left are, in quite a big way, anti-family, but there's a lot of hypocrites among the left, especially in the elites who have money. Those leftists will raise their kids in a certain way, probably tending towards trans stuff, and there are some proper bad things about that. But the conservatives won't live and let live with the left. They'll say, like, you're doing a terrible thing to your child. We should be in control of your child. When, that child is, even though the left don't believe in property, you get these weird anomaly leftists who have families sometimes. And that child belongs to those biological parents, even if they're a bunch of leftists. And the conservatives will be trying to get involved in that child's life, and that would be wrong. Not to mention, I think the conservatives would believe in things like child protective services and things that would have the ability to confiscate kids away from certain parents because of certain actions, thanks to the state. And there's a big kind of think of the children trope, from The Simpsons, which I think applies to how the conservatives think, which is that they are overly concerned about children as a whole, which means children that don't belong to them, which is a communist trait. It is a socialist trait to be trying to involve yourself in the lives of children who don't belong to you. It's a property violation on the ANCAP side. See, the anarchists think differently from the left or right because they are not left or right. I do not believe when an anarchist says, or a libertarian says, that there's a right libertarian or a left libertarian. I do not believe that can exist, because the things that anarchists, libertarians, voluntarists, all that do is pretty centrist in my opinion, because it's not on the authoritarian left or right wings. It seeks individualism. There's another thing that the right and left do: collectivism, complete collectivism, and identity politics, identitarianism. That's shared by both the right and the left. The anarchists and libertarians do not think like that. If they're doing it right anyway and they're not a bunch of linos, then they're individualists. They're against sexual segregation, they're against authoritarianism, they're pro-free markets, they're against the existence of government, they're against voting if they're doing it right. Again, there are libertarian parties out there, which is a ridiculously dumb idea to me, and those are linos, which is libertarians in name only. Libertarian in a political party is just like not a libertarian. It doesn't make any sense logically for an anti-state statist to exist. Are you statist or are you anti-state? Oh, I'm going to hyphenate these opposites. I'll be both. No. You can't be both. Pick one. Are you a libertarian who doesn't want the state to exist, or are you trying to become a member of the state via the democratic elective process, the mob justice process? So libertarians and parties I generally think of as a form of leftist, to be honest. They may be saying things from libertarian ideology, but they're like not practicing what they preach. They're not really seeing it through correctly. They're not doing the things that they say they're meant to be doing. And democracy, like the process of elections, the process of voting, is mob justice anyway. It's like 5 people voting that they want to rape a woman, and then that one woman has a vote not to be raped. That's what democracy essentially is, you know. It's rule by the majority, which isn't necessarily like what suits everyone, you know. If 50% of people vote for one thing to happen, if voting worked the way it's meant to work, which it doesn't, even putting aside that all voting is rigged, if voting worked and 50% of people voted for the politician who... Give me an example, an analogy. Okay, here's a weird ass analogy for you. If 51% of people wanted to vote for the politician who said he'd turn the sky orange, but 49% of the people wanted to vote for the politician who'd permanently turn the sky pink, then the 51% would win and the sky would be orange. But then you've still got a 49% of people, which is almost half of all the people, which is still a vast number of fucking people who didn't get what they want, basically, and have to live with that for 4 years or however long this democratic process would take. That's an enormous amount of people, almost half the country, just having to live under this thing that they didn't want. And yeah, I know the analogy is a really lame one, but I had to think of one on the spot that wasn't tied to a controversial topic of a different kind. Else you'd get the wrong idea. Real anarchists and libertarians don't want you to be taxed. Real anarchists and libertarians don't want there to be a government. We believe in self-governance, self-ownership. So there's a void at the top, and we dutifully maintain that void. So we're following some degree of constitution on the ground. It's not law in the same way as the government would keep laws going with law enforcement, with police officers and things. It's more of a constitution because each person on the ground, when fully armed, which they should be, the Second Amendment of the US Constitution that preserves gun rights, should be a worldwide thing. It should be a natural right for every person to have the right to defend themselves with deadly force. And guns are the great equalizer. You know, if a big burly guy busts into your home and you're a little weedy, disabled old lady in a wheelchair, if you got a shotgun and they got a shotgun, it doesn't really matter that he's a big burly fit guy and you're a little weedy woman in a wheelchair. If you're well practiced with your gun, and so are they, then it becomes like the great equalizer. Like, it becomes some actual form of equality, I suppose. Is like, the guy's probably going to be in danger of death if he bursts into your home and violates your property, just as much as you'd be in danger of death from him doing it. So it becomes the Gadsden snake flag, you know. Don't tread on me. You don't tread on the snake that you see on the ground. You don't go near it, and it won't bite your leg and put you in danger of being in the hospital, perhaps dying, while itself perhaps dying from you treading on it, which is kind of a pretty horrific, forceful thing. I guess the only problem with that is you can tread on a snake by accident, but we can ensure accidents don't happen, I think, if we think about what we're doing before we go into certain places where we know something might be. It's like that Metallica line, right? Don't go looking for snakes, you might find them. So if everyone's armed, and that's the constitution, then you're self-governing yourself. You're able to defend your own property being first and foremost your body, yourself. You self-own yourself. You own your own children until they're over 18, then they own themselves. You own your land, secondly. You own your possessions and property, which is what most people like normies think of when you mention property, is like possessions. It's mainly not that, to be honest. You own your guns, so no one has the right to come in and take your guns from you. There's no authority that can do that. And yeah, there's something else I'm missing that's a self-ownership and property thing. There's land, there's your home. Yeah, there's one thing I'm missing. I can't remember, I covered most of them anyway. There's like 5 or 6 things that cover all private property. And there's no such thing as public property or state-owned property or anything. The state owns no property, actually. It all comes from the public because of taxation. Oh, it's got nice and sunny. In Anarchism, like the anarchist and libertarian world, you would have some kind of constitution that ensures that any time a government pops up, it's your duty to remove that government from its place. You know, no one should be governing because every human has the right to self-govern. No human has the right. I know this is going into a bit of a humanist perspective, and I've not so recently left humanism, but still, every human has the right to self-governance. Every human has the right to defend property of themselves, you know, their kids, their home, and all this. There's a Mini down there that sounds like a jet plane taking off. I don't understand. And that's all you need, basically. That's all you need for like an Anarchism sort of situation. And like an Anarchism, there's this funny word we use to describe the ideal state of just living in the world we live in right now, but we finally realised that government are the problem and we've removed them. So it's quite similar to how we're living in now, except every person is an enormous amount richer than they are now. They all have the freedom to go wherever they want, as long as it's like generously allowed by the landowner or it's within their own private property. There's some sort of allowance made for public land, perhaps, but I mean that would be done through the generosity of a rich landowner. Say an Elon Musk guy pops up, but he's mainly concerned with, instead of SpaceX and Twitter and all this, he's like the guy who's bought up tons of land like Bill Gates has, and instead of doing what Bill Gates does, he allows use of the land for perpetuity for a public space, you know. And some other people might do this, except they have an entry fee for upkeep, because a lot of people might come in and litter or whatever and not treat the land very well. Then access to the land becomes some kind of capitalist transaction wherein you pay and then you get access to roam the land, and that money goes to the wages to pay some guy who is like the litter picker of that land, and that's his job. Anyway, apart from that, Anarchism would be an era rather than a place or a state. It's like, or it's not really a country, it's an era wherein things are a lot freer than they are now. There's a lot clearer sense of what's private and what's not, and there's a lot more ability to go and do what you want, and there's a lot more ability to say what you want, and to earn a lot more money, and to actually earn money from your hard work and actually get that money, which is one big thing that we're missing right now. Is like, currently we don't work for our money. We work and then we get a tiny bit of what's allowed to us by people who are openly stealing from us with a gun to our heads. So none of that will happen. Socialists will have a hard time in Anarchism because their ideology is built on violation of property, so there will be a big period of turmoil there. where a lot of socialists will start to try and violate property like they do now, and realise they can't get away with it. Conservatives might have a shock to the system, but they'll have an easier time of it than the socialists, because a lot of them are kind of pro-gun, and a lot of them say they're pro-freedom, even though they don't believe it. They'll have a shock to the system because there won't be things like welfare, there won't be things like tax, there won't be things like police forces. There will be some kind of thing that they can do that is a bit like a police force, which is like, if you're a little old lady in a village somewhere and you don't think you're going to be able to hold off the armed gang that comes along to you, you can hire like private contract little armies or militias to come in and be your on-call kind of, stop saying kind of, god damn it, so autopilot, your on-call backup group who you pay to help you defend your property if you don't think you're going to be enough to hold off the intruders or the socialists or the burglars who come in. And there'll be more of a sense of localism rather than globalism. A lot of what the world will be villages and towns that know each other and defend each other, and they have their own individual militias, and those militias would group up depending on the size of the threat. Most of them would follow the constitution, hopefully, that gave them their arms in the first place and gave them their freedom in the first place to live in this new world. And that constitution would be, you know, if something tries to be a government, remove it. And if something like a big socialist group rises up, that's the same sort of thing, because it's a large armed group and its intent is to raid and invade and violate property. So it would be dutiful to fight against and remove that as well. It would be a self-defense thing. This whole thing's like going into elevatism, actually. I'm accidentally flipping off the subject of elections and voting and going straight into anarchist ideology and ANCAP and libertarian sort of ideology stuff. Maybe we should get back on topic, huh? Anyway, that's more like what a world without government would be like. The free market would exist, the capitalist market will at last come out of the shadows of illegality, where it shouldn't be anyway, because why should it be illegal? It's only illegal because the government want it illegal so they can steal from you, which that seems to me like the thing that should be illegal. I don't know about you, but that seems to me like the actual thing. And then we'll have the free market at last. People will be able to trade out in the open without regulation by government and price controls and telling people how they should trade in order to trade. Once that's all gone, people can get to the actual meat and bones of trade, and it will have been a long time coming. So you've seen the perspectives. What is the right, what is the left, what are the true libertarians and ANCAPs and voluntarists? What is the point in voting an election? What is the point in getting excited about that? Do you realise you're under dense control? Have you read Orwell's 1984 and actually understood the message that this is socialism and this has happened before in history, and he's simply reflecting upon and writing down things that happened probably under a veil of secrecy quite a lot of the time in the Soviet Union, in Russia and the Eastern Europe bloc countries under socialist rule, and in socialist countries now. Like, what is voting? What are elections? They're nothing. They're not anything. They're fooling you that they're something. But in actual fact, this is a system that's been in place for ages. Some people call it the deep state in America. I think it's actually just the state. It's a lot more simple than that, and a lot more vile and horrific. This is just the state, which means the government. This is the nature of the government. is that they exist already as a bad thing, already as this horrible, immoral entity that puts one human above another, that says that somehow, despite all humans being, I suppose you'd say, born equal, all humans are born not to be better than one another at all, but to be on the same footing as each other. And then for one to somehow gain power, usually through some sort of perverse inheritance, and then use that power to say, I'm going to control all the other humans. I'm more superior than all the other humans. I'm going to make laws, and those laws are going to apply to all the other humans, but they're not going to apply to me because I'm more superior. That's kind of what government is, and it shouldn't be allowed to exist. And I'm not saying I'm pushing for equality either, because equality is a socialist thing. If you make all the humans on Earth have the same exact thing as each other, you just have to wait a few days, and then all those humans will have a completely different thing from each other. They'll all be different via experience, via some working harder, some being lazier. It's the principles of the kulaks and dekulakization, which is another Soviet Union thing. If you try and forcibly do the socialist thing and equalize all people, you think, oh, all people should be equal. That's a kind and hopeful and lovely, cute thing, isn't it? All the people in the world should be equal. They should all get the same. Well, first of all, you by saying that, you're already putting yourself above all humans and becoming superiorist by saying that you're the one who chooses to make that happen, chooses to implement it, and then you've put yourself outside that system. You're kind of saying, that's not going to happen to me. I'm going to make it happen, but it's not going to happen to me. I'm going to equalize everyone. And then you force everyone to be equal, except you, because you're outside it, so you get slightly more than everyone. And everyone has their wealth and possessions and everything redistributed, I guess, and divided between all the members of society, every individual person in the world. They're all suddenly in poverty at that point, because there's not enough to go around. And then the government, or the person who decided to implement that system, just lets it go just for a second. They let it go. And a couple of days later, I swear, you will have a huge amount of people who've done better for themselves because they worked hard, because they went out, because they got things, because they did things, and a ton of people who are poorer than that, or they're still the same level of poverty because they didn't go out and they didn't work and they didn't go and get things and they didn't go and build things. And suddenly nothing's equal again. The system is not equal. Now, the nature of equality is you cannot preserve it. It is like a perfect state that cannot be preserved, and that's why equality to me is communism. It's this utopian pure thing that cannot be achieved. And obviously the second the socialists who implemented that system sees it happening, they just go, oh shit, everyone's not equal now. This is horrific. How did this happen? I just let it go for 2 days and now everyone's not equal. We'll create the kulak class. If you're making slightly more wealth for yourself, or you're working slightly harder than the farmer next door, we'll just murder you, and we'll call it dekulakization. So their solution to the system of things naturally getting unequal, as they will do anyway, is to just murder all the people who do slightly better for themselves. And then the survivors of that, there's suddenly an equal system supposedly of ultra poor farmers, and then the survivors of that, some of them do better for themselves, and then that system becomes unequal a few days later, and then the socialists massacre those people, and then it goes back to a little equal pool of people that is less people in the system, but some of those are going to do better for themselves, and the cycle just goes on and on and on of forced poverty, forced massacre, and famine, because there's less and less good farmers doing better for themselves to actually work hard, make more grain to go around for people. And you also end up with like weaker people after each massacre. Just tons of all the hard-working ones are murdered, so what you're left with is all the non-hard-working, lazy ones, and it just gets lazier and lazier after each massacre. This is why socialism fails everywhere it's been tried. It's trying to defy nature by getting equality, and it's thinking this is kind, like, beautiful thing to achieve, when actually freedom is the beautiful thing to achieve, and it is achievable. You just have to do something drastic that you're not prepared to do, which is stop voting, stop engaging in elections, stop engaging in democracy, stop thinking democracy is a good thing when it's actually an intensely evil thing, and give everyone the rights they need to self-govern themselves, and make that your life, the life of defending your property from violation. That's why elections are cancer, that's why voting is cancer, and that's why anarchists, libertarians and freedom advocates shall inherit the earth. Thank you for watching.